Yo, stop scrolling. For real. Pause that thumb right now. God literally just clocked in on your watch and said, "Stop. Your watch will bring me a smile." Think about that for a second. You're not here by accident. This isn't some random algorithm glitch or a bored Tuesday afternoon. This is a POV moment where the creator of the universe hit pause on your feed to get your attention. And not for some guilt trip or a lecture about your bad habits. He said you're going to bring him a smile. That's wild, right? But here's the real tea while you've been scrolling, swiping, refreshing, trying to get a sliver of validation from strangers who don't even know your last name. God's been watching the one thing you've been trying to hide. The hurt that nobody sees. The quiet ache of being overlooked. That moment when you poured your heart out and got crickets. That time you showed up, did the work, gave your best, and still got passed over like a clearance rack item nobody wants. That's the hidden wound you've been gaslighting yourself about, pretending it doesn't sting. You know that feeling when you're in a room full of people, but still feel invisible. When you serve, give, love, and somehow you're still the background character in your own story. That's not just your anxiety talking. That's real. And God sees it. He sees the tears you wiped away before anyone noticed. He sees the prayers you whispered when you thought no one was listening. He sees the way you've been overlooked by people who should have seen you but didn't have the decency to look. And here's the plot twist. He didn't stop you to shame you. He stopped you to tell you that your watch this exact moment was orchestrated. You didn't land here by accident. You've been summoned into a divine appointment where God is saying, "I see you. I see what nobody else sees. And I'm about to do something about it." So now the ball's in your court. God's watching you with that look, the one that says, "I know you're hurt, but are you going to keep pretending everything's fine, or are you going to let me into that hidden place?" This isn't a guilt trip. This is an invitation. The question is, what are you going to do next? Okay, pause. But don't think this is some soft moment where God just wants to give you a hug and tell you everything's fine. Nah, this is round two. This is where the real work starts. You felt that sting in part moat, right? The raw nerve of being overlooked, the ache of feeling like a background character in your own movie. God clocked that. He stopped you to say, "I see you." And maybe that felt good for a second. Maybe it felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. But here's the thing about a warm blanket, it doesn't get you out of the cold. It just makes you comfortable enough to stay there. Staying is an act of faith. Not the fluffy kind you post on Instagram with a sunset photo. The gritty, knuckle-bleeding kind where your soul is screaming, "Run," but your feet stay planted. The enemy wants you to leave. He's been whispering it since the moment God stopped your thumb. This is too heavy. You're not ready for this. God's not really talking to you, that's just your own thoughts. And the most dangerous one, you've been here too long. It's not working. Move on. That last one is the killer, because the breakthrough, the real, tectonic, world shift of a breakthrough almost never comes in the first, second, or even 99th attempt. It comes at completion. When you've exhausted every excuse, every escape route, every reason to bail, when you're tired, tapped out, and the only thing left is the decision to stay. This is where the battle is won or lost, not in a prayer meeting, not in a worship song. Right here, in the mundane, unglamorous decision to not walk away. The enemy doesn't need you to curse God, cheat on your spouse, or rob a bank. He just needs you to leave early. Before the promise breaks through, before the healing takes root, before the purpose finds its footing. Every story of transformation you've ever admired has a dark middle. It's the part nobody puts on a highlight reel. It's the years of hidden work, the silent tears, the moments where staying felt like the dumbest thing you could do. The enemy fights to make you leave early. Not because he hates you, though he does, but because he knows what happens if you stay. He knows what God will do through a heart that refuses to quit. So here's the question that isn't going away. Will you stay? Okay, stop. You're still here. Good, but now the air gets thin. This isn't about the decision to stay anymore. You've made that call. Now you're in the waiting room, and the silence is so loud it's gaslighting you. You thought staying was the hard part. Cute. Staying is just the entrance. The waiting is the arena. God isn't tapping his foot, checking his watch, annoyed you're taking too long. That's your own impatience, projected onto the throne. The silence isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. It's the processing plant. He's heating the metal to remove the impurities. And that heat, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like being forgotten. This is where the Karen in your head starts screaming for the manager. I stayed. I did the thing. Where's my result? Where's my POV shot of the breakthrough? You want the cinematic montage of success, but you're stuck in the B-roll of a single, unmoving frame. Let's get real about what's happening in the quiet. Every tear you've cried in this season isn't falling into a void. Your POV might be this is pointless. God isn't listening. His POV is different. He sees a collection, a treasure, a bottle of something precious. He's not ignoring your tears. He's treasuring them. He's not deaf to your prayers. He's cataloging them. He's not distracted by a bigger crisis. He's preparing your specific answer. The delay isn't denial. It's detailed assembly. Think about it. You pray for patience. He doesn't hand you a pamphlet. He gives you a traffic jam. You pray for faith. He doesn't give you a diploma. He puts you in a storm. You pray for a testimony. He doesn't give you a microphone. He gives you a trial. The silence is the workshop. Your endurance isn't measured by how loud you shout in church. It's measured by how quiet you can sit in the dark when you feel completely alone. When the enemy's lie sounds more real than God's promise. When your own doubts feel like the only honest thing in the room. This is the crucible. Most people don't fail because the promise was false. They fail because they interpreted the silence as a cancellation. They packed their bags during the 3-day wait, never knowing the resurrection was on day 4. The promise isn't dead, it's being forged. And forging is noisy for the blacksmith, but silent for the metal. You are the metal. Stop squirming. The shaping is happening. So the question isn't, will you stay? You already did. The new question, the one that burns, is this. Your tears are treasured. Can you endure the silence? Okay, stop right there. You're still in the room. The silence is still doing its thing. You've been told your tears are treasured, your prayers are cataloged, and the delay is just detailed assembly. That's the theory. But let me guess what's actually happening in your head right now. You're starting to wonder if the catalog got lost. If the bottle of tears got knocked off the shelf by a bigger, more important request from someone who prays louder, believes harder, and probably doesn't scream Karen at the universe when things get quiet. You're starting to wonder if the silence isn't preparation, but proof. Proof that you don't matter enough for the boss to pick up the phone. That's the enemy's favorite remix of the truth. It's called the silence to cancellation algorithm, and it runs on a single fuel, bitterness. See, you can endure silence for a season. You can even survive feeling forgotten for a while. But when you sit on the floor of that processing plant, and the heat hasn't turned down, and the answer hasn't come, and your friends have stopped asking, and your own mouth tastes like prayers, you're too tired to say out loud. That's when the quiet voice starts whispering something different. It says, he's not listening. He doesn't care. He's got better things to do. You're not even on the list. And if you let that whisper sit, it doesn't stay a whisper for long. It grows legs. It becomes a story you tell yourself. And pretty soon, that story hardens into a shell around your heart called bitterness. Bitterness is the slowest, most dangerous poison you can swallow. It doesn't kill you fast. It doesn't make you leave the faith loudly, with a scandal. It just makes you sit in the faith with your arms crossed. You still show up. You still pray, kind of. You still mutter the words. But your POV has shifted. Your POV used to be, God is good. He's working. I trust the process. Your POV now is, yeah, sure, whatever. Let's see if anything actually happens. That's the POV shift that destroys breakthroughs faster than any fiery trial ever could. The trial doesn't cancel the promise. But your bitterness, it can cancel your ability to receive it. Let's get real. You're not mad at God because he's evil. You're mad because he's quiet, and that feels like a betrayal. Someone who promised to never leave you or forsake you has apparently gone on a silent retreat, and you weren't invited. And that's a deep wound. A wound that's easy to stitch shut with bitterness. But here's the thing about bitterness. It doesn't hurt God. It doesn't slow down the answer. It doesn't make the assembly on your breakthrough go back to square one. It only hurts you. It shrinks your hands so you can't receive what's coming. It narrows your eyes so you can't see the delivery when it arrives. You can be in the right place, at the right time, with the right promise, and miss the entire thing because you were too busy nursing the wound of being kept waiting. So here's the command for this stretch of the arena. It's not a try harder command, it's a let go command. Release the bitterness, now, not tomorrow, Not when you understand why you had to wait. Not when he finally explains himself. Now, imagine your hands are clenched around that wound, around the list of unanswered prayers, around the count of days he's ignored you. Now open them, not because the answer appeared, but because open hands are the only ones that can hold a blessing. You're going to have to trust beyond the silence. That's the development arc. Anyone can trust when the sky is clear, when the playlist is bangers, when the vibes are immaculate. That's not faith. That's having good Wi-Fi. Faith is trusting when the signal bars on your heart are showing zero. When every logical, emotional, and circumstantial indicator says you're ghosted, faith at that level isn't a feeling. It's a decision. A stubborn, quiet, even angry decision to say, I don't feel it. I don't see it. I don't understand it. But I'm not going to turn my heart cold because of it. And that's where the prayer in the silence becomes the most important tool you didn't know you had. You can't skip this part. You can't fast forward by being good enough or loud enough. The only way through the silence is through it. And you get through it by praying anyway. Not the loud performance prayer. The raw, ugly, God, I'm not even sure you're there, but I'm still talking at this ceiling prayer. You're not proving anything to God with that prayer. You're proving something to yourself. You're proving that your trust isn't dependent on circumstances. You're proving that your connection isn't a fair weather friendship. You're proving that even when he's quiet, you haven't packed your bags. And here's the wild truth. That stubbornness, that refusal to let bitterness set up camp, it's the key that unlocks the door. Release bitterness now. Let go of the wound. And the most terrifying question in this whole arena, will you trust the silence? You're still in the arena. Let's be real about what this moment actually is. You've released the bitterness. Good. That was the first lock. But now you're standing in what feels like a fog machine that someone forgot to turn off, and you're supposed to just keep walking without seeing where you're going, without a guarantee that the next step isn't a trap door. Welcome to the unseen battle. I know. See, here's the thing nobody tells you about spiritual warfare. It doesn't look like warfare. There are no dramatic sword fights, no lightning bolts, no audible booms from heaven telling you good job, soldier. It looks like Tuesday. It looks like waiting. It looks like waking up and doing the same thing you did yesterday, with the same silence, the same ache, the same unanswered question rattling around in your skull like a loose marble. And that's exactly why most people lose. They're looking for a visible enemy, a clear target, a boss battle with a health bar they can see depleting. But the enemy you're fighting right now, it's not a demon with glowing eyes. It's the voice in your own head that says this isn't working. It's the feeling in your gut that says you're wasting your time. It's the friend who casually asks, so, still waiting on that thing. And suddenly, your whole faith feels like a costume that doesn't fit anymore. That's the battle. It's quiet, it's boring, it's grind, and it's the only one that actually matters. Because here's the POV shift you need. That delay you're in, it's not a punishment, it's protection. Think about it. You're begging God to open a door, but you haven't asked if you're ready for what's on the other side. You're screaming for the promotion, but you haven't counted the cost of the new level. You're desperate for the relationship, but you haven't considered that the person you are right now might not be able to hold what that relationship requires. The delay isn't God gaslighting you. It's God fortifying you. Every day you stay in the unseen battle is a day you're being hardened, not in a bitter way. In a your bones are getting stronger way. In a your spiritual muscles are learning to carry weight way. In a you're becoming the kind of person who doesn't collapse when the pressure hits way. You can't skip the gym and expect to lift the mountain. So here you are, still in the fog, still walking, still talking at a ceiling that hasn't answered. And you're probably thinking, how long? How many more days of this? When does the silence break? That's the wrong question. The right question is, who am I becoming in this silence? Because the chains are breaking. Can you feel it? Not with your eyes, not with your circumstances, not with visible evidence that would satisfy a courtroom, but with something deeper. Something that stirs in your chest when you're alone at Ba AM and you realize you're still here. You haven't quit, you haven't cursed. You haven't packed your faith into a cardboard box and left it on the curb. Something is shifting. You can't see it yet. You can't point to it and say, there, right there. That's the breakthrough. But you feel it. Like the pressure change before a storm. Like the subtle vibration before an earthquake. Like the air getting thick right before the rain finally comes. The chains are breaking. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic snap that earns a movie soundtrack, but link by link, quietly, invisibly. While you were still walking through the fog, convinced nothing was happening. That's the development arc. You're not stuck. You're being positioned. And the most terrifying part, the shift might not announce itself until you've taken one more step. One more day of trust. One more prayer in the silence. One more surrender of the timetable you built in your head. Can you feel the shift? Because if you can't, that's okay. The chains don't need your permission to break. They're breaking anyway. Right now, while you're reading this, while you're wondering if any of it is real, the question is whether you'll still be standing when the last link falls. You're still here. That's the first thing. Not in a good job, you passed the test, kind of way. In a the silence didn't kill you, so something else is happening, kind of way. Because silence doesn't just test your patience. Silence tests your identity. When nothing is happening on the outside, you're forced to confront what's actually happening on the inside. And most people don't survive that confrontation. They fill the quiet with noise, new goals, new relationships, new distractions, new versions of the same escape. But you didn't. You sat in it. You let the quiet press against your chest until you forgot how to breathe. And you're still here. That matters more than you know. Here's what nobody tells you about the development arc. It doesn't feel like growth. It feels like death. Not the dramatic kind where angels sing and you ascend into a better version of yourself. The slow kind. The kind where you wake up one morning and realize the thing you've been praying for doesn't excite you anymore. Not because you don't want it, but because something in you has shifted. The wanting has changed shape. The desperation has quieted. The grasping has loosened its grip. And you look at your own hands and wonder, when did I stop clutching so hard? That's the moment. Right there. That's the pivot point. You were so focused on the destination that you didn't notice yourself becoming someone who could handle the journey. You were so locked in on the breakthrough that you missed the breaking, the slow, invisible cracking of everything inside you that wasn't built to last. The false self. The performative faith. The version of you that needed the applause, the affirmation, the visible proof that you were on the right path. That version is dying. And it's not dying loudly. It's dying in the silence. In the moments when nobody's watching. In the BAM conversations you're having with a ceiling that still hasn't answered. And that's exactly what God is asking of you right now. Full attention. Not the kind where you check your phone between prayers. Not the kind where you scroll through worship songs while your mind is running spreadsheets of worry. Full attention. The rare kind. The kind that costs you something. The kind where you stop asking, when, and start asking, what are you doing in me right now? Because the harvest, the one that's been promised, the one that's been whispered over your life in moments you thought were random, that harvest is not going to come from your striving. It's going to come from your staying. Endurance is the gatekeeper. You can have the revelation. You can have the prophecy. You can have the word that made your spirit leap. But if you don't have endurance, none of it survives the first drought. Jesus didn't say, blessed are those who get a vision and then quit when it gets hard. He said, blessed are those who endure to the end, because the end is where the wait is. The end is where the promise lands. The end is where all those tears you thought were wasted turn into irrigation for the field you didn't know you were planting. Every tear you've cried in the dark, not wasted. Every moment you felt overlooked, unseen, passed over, forgotten, not wasted. Every time you watched someone else get the thing you were praying for, and you had to smile and say, I'm happy for you, while something in your chest cracked open, not wasted. That's the water. That's the irrigation. That's the soil being softened for the seed that hasn't even broken the surface yet. You can't have a harvest without a burial. And burial requires darkness. And darkness requires trust. Are you starting to feel it now? The shift. Not in your circumstances, forget circumstances for a second, in your soul. In the part of you that stopped screaming for answers and started settling into the mystery. That's not resignation. That's maturity. That's the difference between a faith that needs constant external confirmation and a faith that has learned to stand on its own. That's the hidden worth God has been cultivating in you while you were too busy looking at the closed door to notice the room you were in. Your worth doesn't come from what you produce. Your worth doesn't come from the breakthrough. Your worth doesn't come from the open door, the promotion, the relationship, the platform. Your worth comes from the fact that you kept showing up when nothing was showing up for you. That's the hidden worth, the kind the world can't see, the kind that doesn't have a metric. The kind that won't look good on a resume but will sustain you through the collapse of every external structure you've built your identity on. That's what God is after. Not your performance, not your output, not your hustle, disguised as faith, your attention. Your full, undistracted, quiet, surrendered attention. The kind that says, I don't know what you're doing, I can't see where this is going, and I don't have a timeline anymore, but I'm still here. I'm still facing you. I'm still listening. That's the prayer that moves heaven. And you're right at the edge of it, right at the place where most people turn back. Right at the threshold where the silence gets so thick you can taste it, and your entire being screams, go back to the familiar, go back to the comfortable, go back to the thing that made sense before all this waiting started. That's the temptation. That's the enemy's last move. Not to attack you while you're strong, but to whisper to you while you're tired, to offer you an exit when you're one step away from the harvest. Can you feel the weight of this moment? Not dramatized, not theatrical, real. This moment. Right now. Your eyes moving across these words, your chest tightening, that quiet voice inside you that's been saying, this is it, this is the moment, don't turn away. That's not manipulation. That's not emotional hype. That's the spirit pressing into the space you've been holding open. Your harvest depends on this moment, not on the next prayer, not on the next worship session, not on the next prophetic word. On this moment, on whether you stay when staying feels like nothing, on whether you keep your attention fixed when everything in you wants to look away. Will you stay? Okay, never quiz. Right now. You've been sitting here, nodding along, feeling the words hit your chest like they were written just for you. But let's be real for a second. What have you actually done with any of it? You've cried. You've felt seen. You've had that moment where you whisper, finally, someone gets it. But has any of that changed what your hands do tomorrow morning? Has it changed what you reach for when the feeling fades and you're left alone with your phone, your fridge, your old habits? Here's the part nobody tells you about the climax of your story. It's not a lightning bolt. It's not a voice from heaven that splits the sky. It's a door, and it's been there the whole time. You just didn't realize you were the one holding it shut. You've been waiting for God to move, for the check to clear, for the phone to ring, for the apology to come, for the person who hurt you to suddenly wake up and see the light. And while you waited, you kept polishing the same wound, replaying the same conversation, holding it up to the mirror like a badge of honor. This is the thing I survived. This is why I can't move. This is my proof that life is hard. And God is standing right in front of you, holding the door open, saying, I know, I saw the whole thing. Now, are you coming through, or are you going to keep showing people your scar? That's the brutal truth about hidden worth. It's not a trophy you put on a shelf. It's not a story you tell at a conference. It's a muscle that atrophies the second you stop using it. And the way you use it is simple. You take the hand of someone who's still in the middle of their own silence, their own burial, their own confusion, and you say, I don't have the answers, but I'm right here, and I'm not leaving. That's the harvest. Not applause, not platform, not finally getting the thing you were denied. The harvest is that you become the person who can stand in someone else's dark room and not flick the lights on. You just sit. You just stay. You become the proof that God hasn't abandoned them because you're still there. That's the hidden worth that rewards itself. That's the wealth that compounds in a currency no bank recognizes. That's the moment the seed stops being a seed and becomes a root. And roots don't scream for attention. They just hold everything up. So here's the question you've been running from. Not, what if I never get my breakthrough? You already know the answer to that. You survive anyway. You don't stay because it works. You stay because staying is who you are now. No, the real question is harder. The real question is, what if the breakthrough already happened, and you missed it because you were looking for a parade instead of a door? What if the thing breaking through right now isn't a miracle, it's you? Okay, pop quiz. Part 2. You thought the first one was hard? That was the warm-up. That was me handing you a map and asking if you were brave enough to look at it. Now the real test. You felt that shift, didn't you? When the words stopped being a sermon and started being a mirror. When you realized the door was always there, and you were the one holding it shut. That moment of clarity, that raw, uncomfortable truth, it felt like the climax. Like the final scene where the hero finally understands their own power. But here's the thing about Hollywood climaxes. They're 15 minutes long, and then the credits roll. And you walk out of the theater, and you go back to your life. This isn't a movie. This is the part they never show you. The part after the epic speech, after the tears, after the swelling music. The part where you have to actually walk through that door. And let me tell you, that door doesn't open into a paradise. It doesn't open into a stage with a spotlight and a microphone. It opens into a hallway. A long, dark, unglamorous hallway. And at the end of it is a garden. But first, you have to walk. And that walk is the whole point. That walk is where the endurance becomes testimony. Where the tears, the ones you thought were wasted, start to irrigate the ground beneath your feet. You don't see it yet. You feel the effort, the strain, the ache of muscles you didn't know you had. You feel the dry dust of the hallway, the loneliness of the journey. You look for the parade. You look for the sign. You look for anything that says, you're almost there. And God says, keep walking. That's the climax, not the arrival. The climax is the 38th step in a 40-step journey, when your legs are screaming and your mind is whispering that you should have stayed in the room with the scar. The climax is the moment the seed, buried deep in the faithful soil, finally cracks open. And for a second, it feels like dying, because that's what the breakthrough feels like. It feels like loss. It feels like the end of everything you knew how to be. It feels like the death of the version of you that needed the wound, needed the story, needed the badge of survival. You think breakthrough is a payout. It's a burial. The seed doesn't become a root by reaching for the sky. It becomes a root by pushing into the dark, by surrendering its hard, safe shell, by saying, I don't want to be a seed anymore. I want to be what I was made to be. And that hurts. But here's the secret the soil knows. The pain is the growth. The ache of the push is the only proof that the root is taking hold. Endurance isn't about gritting your teeth and waiting for the pain to stop. Endurance is about realizing the pain is the process. The silence is the preparation. The holding pattern is the ascension. You've been standing in the hallway, begging for the door at the end to swing open automatically. You've been leaning on the walls, wondering why it's so dark, why it's so quiet, why the victory lap feels like a death march. And I'm telling you, the victory lap is the death march. You walk not because you see the light. You walk because the walking is what builds the light inside you. You endure not because the breakthrough is on its way. You endure because the endurance is the breakthrough. Every step you take in the dark is a seed planted. Every moment you don't turn back is a root pushing deeper. The climax is not a single event. It's a threshold. It's the moment you stop checking the map and start trusting the ground beneath you. It's the moment you realize that the testimony isn't what happens to you at the end. It's what you become in the middle. You have become someone who can sit in the dark. You have become someone who doesn't need the lights on to know where they're going. You have become the proof, and proof doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be true. So stop waiting for the curtain to rise. The play is happening right now. The orchestra is the sound of your own heartbeat. The spotlight is the quiet certainty that you're not where you used to be. The seed is taking root. The tears are turning into testimony. The endurance is your anthem. The breakthrough is closer than you think. Can you feel it? Pav. You're standing at the edge of the garden, dirt under your nails, sweat on your brow, and you're asking yourself the question everyone asks when the payoff doesn't come fast enough. Was it worth it? You've been digging. You've been kneeling in the mud of your own obedience, pressing seeds into soil that felt dead, watering ground that gave you nothing but silence. You've been showing up when nobody clapped. You've been praying when the ceiling felt like concrete. You've been choosing to stay when every cell in your body screamed, run. And now you're tired, not the good tired, the kind that makes you wonder if you've been gaslighting yourself this whole time. But here's the thing about seeds. They don't send you a text message when they crack open. They don't post a status update saying, hey, root system forming, all good here. They grow in the dark. They push downward before they break upward. They do the most important work of their entire existence, while no one, not even the gardener, can see a single thing happening. You've been standing there with your hands on your hips, staring at the dirt, waiting for a sprout. And God's been standing right next to you, saying, your watch brings me a smile. Not because he's some cosmic Karen clocking your hours. Not because he needs your performance, but because the watching, the staying, the not walking away when the seed hasn't even opened its eyes yet, that's the covenant of glory. You think the glory is the harvest. You think the glory is the moment the fruit appears and everyone claps. You've seen those Instagram reels, the big reveal, the dramatic before and after, the testimony that makes people cry. And you've been comparing your behind the scenes to their highlight reel. But the glory isn't the fruit. The glory is the faith that buried the seed when the ground looked like a grave. The glory is the covenant you made in the dark, the one where you said, I don't know what's happening under this dirt, but I trust the one who put me here. The glory is the decision you made when the hallway went quiet, when the parade didn't show up, when the mountaintop felt like a myth. You chose to stay, not because you saw something, but because you believed someone. And that right there, that's what heaven watches. That's what makes the angels lean in, not your success. You're staying. The enemy's been whispering that your watch is wasted, that you've been standing in the wrong garden, waiting for a harvest that's never coming, that the seed you buried was defective, that you should cut your losses and walk back to the room with the scar. At least that pain was familiar. But God's been whispering something louder. He's been saying the seed isn't dead. It's just underground. And the reason you can't see it? The reason you feel like nothing's happening? Because the most powerful things are built in secret. Every root that will anchor your future is being formed right now, in the dirt, in the waiting, in the silence. Every structure that will hold your harvest is being laid in the dark. You can't see it. You can't feel it. But it's happening. The covenant of glory isn't a contract you sign at the start. It's a bond that grows in the middle. It's the understanding between you and the gardener that you'll stay until the seed takes root, even if that takes longer than you planned, even if it's harder than you expected, even if everyone else says you're wasting your time. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Most people walk away right before the root snaps into place. They get to the last inch of soil and they say, this is stupid, nothing's happening. They abandon the garden 3 days before the sprout breaks through. They miss the miracle because they couldn't handle the middle. And you're still here. You're still watching. You're still trusting. You're still kneeling in the dirt with your hands open, saying, I don't know how this ends, but I know who started it. That's the climax. Not the moment the harvest comes. The moment you decide to stay when the harvest hasn't arrived yet. That's the threshold. That's the pivot. That's the split screen moment where one version of you walks away and the other version becomes the proof. You've already chosen which version you are. You're still reading. You're still standing. You're still trusting the dirt. So listen, the seed is taking root. You can't see it. You can't measure it. But the soil is shifting. The ground underneath you is changing. The structure is being built. The covenant is unfolding. And you watch the hours you've spent in the quiet, the prayers you've whispered into the dark, the tears you've let fall onto the dirt. Your watch is bringing a smile to heaven. Not because you've arrived, because you haven't left. Now here's the question that hangs in the air, the one you can feel in your chest right now. Will you finish strong? And now the garden shifts. Not because you see it, because the soil knows what your eyes cannot perceive. The roots have found their grip. The structure beneath the dirt has locked into place. And the one who knelt beside you through every silent hour, through every unanswered prayer, through every moment you thought the seed had rotted, he rises. And when he rises, something in the atmosphere changes. You feel it in your chest before you understand it in your mind. A loosening, a shift. Not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of breakthrough the world would film for a viral moment. Something quieter, something deeper. The chains you've carried so long you forgot they were there. They don't clatter to the ground. They simply dissolve, like morning mist under a sun you didn't realize had risen. This is what endurance produces. Not a reward you can cash, not a trophy you can display, but a freedom so deep it changes the way you breathe. The weight you thought was permanent, it was never yours to carry. It was the pressure that pushed the seed deeper. It was the darkness that taught the root to reach. It was the silence that made you listen hard enough to hear the gardener's heartbeat beneath the dirt. And now, the ground breaks open, not with violence. With the slow, unstoppable inevitability of life that has been preparing in secret. The sprout doesn't scream when it breaks through. It simply appears. One day the soil is flat, barren, mocked by those who walked past and shook their heads. The next day there is green where there was nothing. And everyone who said your watch was wasted will have to explain how something came from nothing. But you won't need their explanation. You were there. You saw the secret work. You felt the gardener's hand in the dark. And here's what you will carry for the rest of your days. The joy that comes from not leaving. Not the cheap happiness of a problem solved. Not the fleeting excitement of a prayer finally answered. But the deep, ancient joy of having stood in the storm and refused to move. The joy of having trusted the invisible when the visible screamed against you. the joy of having loved the gardener more than the harvest. That joy doesn't fade. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It has become part of your bones, because you learned something in that garden that most people never learn anywhere, that the waiting was not the absence of God. It was the presence of God in a form you didn't recognize. It was the slow work of making you someone who could carry what was coming. It was the preparation of the vessel before the filling, and now the fill begins. But here is the strangest part, the part that will make you smile even as heaven smiles at you. The joy that overflows now doesn't come from what you received. It comes from what you gave. You gave your attention. You gave your patience. You gave your tears into the dirt. You gave your trust when giving trust felt like throwing seeds into a hurricane. And in giving, you became something that cannot be unmade. The chains that fell were never the main story. The chains were just the evidence that you had been standing in one place long enough for heaven to notice. The chains were the sign that you had been faithful in the hidden place. The chains were the testimony that would become someone else's hope. Because now you have a story that doesn't end with, and then everything got better. You have a story that says, I stayed in the dark until I learned to see. I stayed in the silence until I learned to hear. I stayed in the dirt until I learned that the seed and the gardener were enough. And that story, it will outlive you. It will outlast every harvest this garden produces, because the people who come after you will not need to see your harvest to believe. They will hear you say, I didn't leave. I waited. And heaven smiled. That is the covenant fulfilled, not the contract signed in ink. The bond forged in fire, in patience, in the choice made over and over again to stay when every instinct said run. And now heaven does more than smile. The gardener turns to you with eyes that have watched every moment of your watch. And he speaks the words that have been forming since the first tear fell into the first seed bed. Well done. Not because you succeeded, because you stayed. Not because you saw fruit, because you trusted the root. Not because your watch was short, because your watch was long, and you did not abandon it. The blessing that falls now is not the blessing of reward. It is the blessing of recognition. You have been seen, not by the crowd, not by those who walked past and whispered, but by the one whose opinion shaped the universe. And being seen by him is the only visibility that matters. The chains are not just broken. They have become part of your testimony now. Every link that held you is a link someone else will hold on to when their own chains feel unbreakable. The tears you shed have become a well that others will drink from. The prayers you whispered into the dark have become a humming in the air that someone else will hear when they cannot find their own voice. Your watch brought heaven a smile, and that smile is not the end. It is the beginning of everything your waiting was preparing you for. So stand now. Stand in the breaking light. Stand with the soil still clinging to your knees and the dew of morning on your face. Stand as the proof that patience is not passive, that endurance is not weakness, that the ones who stay are the ones who change the world not by force, but by becoming the ground where something holy can grow. The gardener is not done with this garden, and you are not done either. You are just beginning to walk in the harvest that was planted in the dark. You are just beginning to taste the fruit of roots you could not see. You are just beginning to live the life that was being prepared while you waited. So go with the joy no circumstance can steal. Go with the chains that fell now carried as authority, not weight. Go with the smile of heaven still warm on your soul. And know this, every seed you plant from this day forward will grow faster, because your roots already know the way. Every storm you face will be smaller, because you have stood in the dark and learned to stand still. Every silence will be shorter, because you have learned that the gardener speaks most clearly when the world is quiet. Your watch is over. Your walk has begun. And heaven is still smiling not because you arrived, but because you stayed until the end.